Welcome to Next Round with the Pacific Research Institute. I'm your host, Rowena Ichon. Thanks for joining us on this special 100th podcast with House Republican Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. As many of our listeners know, Leader McCarthy is a Californian representing Bakersfield in the 23rd District. We discuss with Congressman McCarthy the first 6 months of divided government in Washington, as well as a lot of issues that Californians care about, from tech to transportation, from healthcare to infrastructure, and even water. Thanks for joining us.
Kevin McCarthy, thanks so much for being our 100th guest here on the Next Round podcast. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Tim, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you, and it's kind of exciting for me to have you and Rowena, and I get to be the 100th guest. Pretty impressive.
And it's exciting to get the band back together a little bit for a few minutes to talk about some of the issues that we all care about. Right now, we're about 6 months into a divided Congress and divided government in Washington, with Speaker Pelosi in charge in the House and Republicans in charge in the Senate and White House. So from your perch, how do you grade the first few months of the House Democratic majority?
Well, if you look what the Democrats are doing, and if I go back a little time to the 100 days, it's almost like they're wasting their majority, because just look at a few of the statistics. Really, their first 100 days was focused mainly on resolutions. They had radicalism, and they were just resisting. When you compare the first quarter of this Congress with the first quarter of the first session of the last Congress, 68 bills passed out of committee in this first quarter, whereas the last Congress, when I was majority leader, Congress passed 141. So it was 68 to 141. 97 bills passed out of the House in the first quarter compared to only 100, so we did 132. So the 68 to 141, that's passed out of committee. The 97 to 132, that's passed out of the floor, so we were more productive in the last one. But they have passed fewer bipartisan bills, and they've had far less enacted into law. So if you were rating it just on the material of the data of how many bills they passed, whether they're bipartisan, whether they're out of committee, and a real interesting fact there, they had 68 bills out of committee, but 97 passed the floor. That means they're not using the committee process, which is not good legislation. That just means leadership is writing the bill, putting it directly to the floor, and not having debate, and that makes it a real challenge. So I do not give them a passing grade.
So let's talk about some of the issues that are both big in Washington and California, starting with tech. Every day it seems like there's some other big scandal in the tech world, from how our private data is being handled or social media companies targeting conservative voices. Many Americans are concerned about big tech's role in their daily lives. It seems like some sort of sweeping congressional action is inevitable in tech. In your view, what course should Congress chart? How can we protect people's freedoms and privacy while also encouraging innovation and the free market?
Well, technology is amazing. It's made our life easier in so many aspects, from grabbing a car, from getting food brought to your house, from communicating with your children, making advancements. But at the same time, there's real concerns here on privacy. Let me give you an example. Imagine if I'm in Congress and I propose a law that made postage free in the United States. So if you wanted to mail a letter, it was free. But by making it free, we get to read your letters. In doing so, we find out maybe you have a relative coming to visit, so we give them an advertisement for a cheap hotel. Or we find out it's summertime, your kids are out of school, you got a vacation. Maybe we give you advertisement for Universal Studios, Disneyland, and others. Or we find out you're interested in a certain subject, so we send you an advertisement for different books that you should buy. Or maybe we notice in your letter you're concerned about your wardrobe, so we send you some different clothing. Or you talk about food, we give you some ideas of where to go eat. People would think I'm crazy. Why am I reading their letters? Well, everybody that ever uses Gmail, that's exactly what happens to them. It's to make a point. If people are going to lose their privacy, there needs to be a knowledge of it up front, and people have to be able to opt into that to let their privacy go. And if they leave a site and they don't want to be a part of it anymore, they should be able to take their data with them. I think those are some of the discussions we're going to have in the future. But if you really want America to be the leader again for the next century, we're going to have to be the leader in technology as well. There's so many good things that could happen for us. We could help cure cancer. But also, technology allows ISIS to recruit. So we have to be able to make sure, and one of the things that you have to bring up debate, 95% of all searches go through one search engine, Google. And if you're on the second page, 90% of the people drop off. So what are they supplying on the knowledge? Are they putting their thumb on the scale? Is the algorithm fair in the process of what they put forth? Those are questions we want to know about. If you look at the big entities out there from Facebook, from Instagram, from YouTube and Google, well, those are owned just by two companies. And so you wonder from the standpoint, too, as the discussion, are we allowing competition as equally as we did in the past? Because the one great thing about technology, it's usually a disruptor, and it brings new ideas. It allows others to foster and grow, and we want to make sure we're able to do that.
So let's talk about another hot issue in Washington and California both, which is single payer. We had our wild single payer bill in Sacramento last session, which was estimated to cost $400 billion a year. And just when you thought you got away from all the wild ideas of Sacramento, here comes the Medicare for All bill in Congress, which is projected to cost $32 trillion. Now, we know the left is really clamoring for single payer, but you do see some voices like Speaker Rendon and to a lesser degree Speaker Pelosi throwing some cold water on this. So where do you see things going with Medicare for All in Congress this session? And do you think that we're on an inevitable path toward a government health care system?
God help us. Let's hope we are not. I don't call it Medicare for All. I call it Medicare for None. Because the first thing it will do is bankrupt Medicare. So for anybody who's currently on Medicare, it's a very quick pace to make it collapse. Now, for those more than 150 Americans who have private health insurance from their employer or others, they no longer have that option. That becomes a real concern. It questions whether you could have the VA or TRICARE. And then it's going to cost $32 trillion. For the same reason, even the most liberal people in Sacramento decided they shouldn't move forward because it was more money than they actually even bring in, twice as much. But what's concerning to me, here in Congress, more than half of the Democrats have co-sponsored the bill. They've already had a hearing in the Rules Committee. So they're pushing hard for this. The only thing we agree upon on both sides is that Obamacare doesn't work. So we've got to find a better system. And Medicare for None is not the way to do it. It's going to take more than 150 million Americans that currently have health insurance and take it away. It is really the ultimate government-controlled health care. That's exactly what it would be.
One of the biggest topics in Washington these days is infrastructure. Both parties say that infrastructure is a priority and are committed to trying to reach an agreement. You have an interesting proposal, the GAIN Act, which would provide funding to communities that need infrastructure dollars the most and reduce the size of government. Tell our listeners about your proposal and also what you think the prospects are for an infrastructure deal this year between Congress and President Trump.
Well, everybody agrees we need infrastructure. We see it each and every day. But how do we have infrastructure that, one, actually gets built in a short time frame? So we're going to have to reform some of the regulation that we have in building roads and bridges, especially if we're rebuilding the bridges and already have the right-of-way. And how do we pay for it? So the part I've always start with, where do we agree upon? Because government is not designed to have one person get 100% of what they want. It's actually designed to find compromise. And there is a compromise in Congress. It's called the GAIN Act. And what the GAIN Act would do, it actually has support from the most conservatives inside Congress and those on the other side of the aisle. The Black Caucus and the Freedom Caucus both endorse it. The GAIN Act stands for Generating American Income and Infrastructure Now. It would sell off excess property. It'd give you more than $100 billion automatically. You could invest that money into the 100th poorest district. So at the same time, you're building infrastructure, but you're also rebuilding America and making those districts more competitive where they can compete for more jobs and grow at the same time. To me, that is where I would start with infrastructure, a place where everybody agrees upon and build from there.
When you talk infrastructure in California, our minds naturally go to two things, water and transportation. And you're seeing Governor Newsom is really trying to change course a little bit from Governor Brown. He's already talked about trying to pare back the controversial tunnels plan to a single tunnel. And he says on high-speed rail, he wants to, quote, rethink it, although although he's still committed to the first part of the project in the Central Valley. You have another great idea, the Railway Act, that would really address both of these issues, water and high-speed rail. You'd get more money for water and take away money for high-speed rail. So tell us about your proposal and some of your leadership and things that you're working on in Washington to address California's water and transportation challenges.
Well, I'm really opposed to what they call the high-speed rail because, first of all, it's not high-speed. Second, the business plan is so poorly written, it's irresponsible and it's reckless to go forward with it. You'd have to subsidize the rider. They didn't get the private money involved as they promised the taxpayers and the voters. So what I believe is if California is not holding up to the contract they made with the federal government, they still have roughly almost $1 billion sitting there. And if they're not moving forward with it, what's going to happen is the federal government's going to pull that money back because California broke the contract. What I would like to see happen, because I believe in limited government, and one of the roles of government is infrastructure. Regardless of what Democrats and Republicans believe, the most important thing is that we work together towards water storage projects to make sure we collect water during the wet years for the dry ones coming, because we all know we'll have another drought in the future. Now, California is the 5th largest producer of agriculture in the world. It's so important to our farmers to have a sustainable water supply because California feeds the world, but we have 39.9 million people. We're wasting water by allowing it to go directly out to the ocean. We should store it so we could have greater growth. We have greater opportunity. Now, what the Railway Act would do, it would take the failed California high-speed rail project, the money they have left over, and put that into another infrastructure program. And the greatest return on the investment is storing of water. So I believe that would be a better use of it than just have the federal government take it back. But we would store the water in a very wet year like we have this year for another year when it's going to be a drought. I think that is preparing for the future. That is a smart way to do it instead of the reckless and irresponsible idea of continuing along the path of a high-speed rail that will never get built and more wasted money.
Last question. You've been in your role as House Republican leader for about 6 months now, and it's not the first time you've been the Republican leader. You know, I remember back in 2003 and 4 when we were working together here in Sacramento, and you had kind of a similar dynamic working with a Democratic majority. Yet back then, you were so successful fighting for Republican principles while also achieving common ground. So what are some of the lessons and experiences you take from your time as Republican leader in Sacramento to your new role in Washington?
You know, I never forget where I come from, Tim and Rowena. One thing I realized, Sacramento taught you a lot because we did a lot of things by what was called the Big Five. I realized I was not in the majority, but that didn't mean you didn't have good ideas. It didn't mean that you didn't fight for your ideas. And lots of times we won in those situations. Government is not designed where one side gets 100% of what they want. You've got to find common ground. And I'm willing to work with anyone who wants to work to make the future better than today. That tomorrow is better than the day that we had before. So when I sit down, I listen. I also am not shy about putting an idea forward. And I also am not afraid if somebody else brings another idea forward. But finding ways that we can find compromise and always keeping to my principle, but finding a way to solve a problem. And if you first know what the problem is and you want to solve it, you work towards that factor. And I do believe there are good people on both sides of the aisle. I may disagree, but I never make it personal. People have different philosophies. And there's a way to be able to find compromise by keeping both principles and having a win-win situation. I believe that makes all constituents in California and the nation stronger. You look at what we've been able to do with the economy. This is the strongest economy we've had in 50 years. That's your lifetime, Tim. There are more jobs being offered, 1 million more jobs than people who are actually even looking for a job. We have not seen this in our lifetime. The opportunity we have, we're about to become energy independent. We're a next exporter of our own energy now, which makes the world safer. We're combating opioids. We're bending the curve of the growth within there. And we look at what we've done with human trafficking. Those are all things, when I talk about human trafficking and opioids, that were very strong bipartisan situations. At the end of the day, the Democrats did not want to go with us on taxes, but we had to keep with our principles, move forward, and now the economy's stronger because we did it. We just had a 3.2% GDP growth in the first quarter. The first quarter are usually your weakest. No one thought it would be this strong. We are in a battle when it comes to the future with China. This is going to be a tough battle, but the one thing that you look at, you want to be able to solve this problem now before China's economy and military is stronger. So this is something that not looking short term, but looking, could the next decade be ours? And that's really going to find common ground. That people put the partisanship aside, put people before politics, and literally say, we're going to do what is in the best interest of America, and that's to find a solution to this problem.
Thank you so much, Leader McCarthy, for joining us in PRI's 100th podcast. It's been an honor and a privilege.
All right, Rowena, Tim, thank you for all the work that you do and keep fighting for the principles we all believe in. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks to our special guest, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. You can follow him on Twitter at GOP Leader. Also, if you're in the Bay Area, join us for a luncheon on July 9th with Daniel Hannan, member of the European Parliament. Mr. Hannan discusses Brexit and the prospects for a stronger alliance between the U.S. and the U.K. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or TuneIn. And please do us a favor and give us 5 stars. You can also listen to our podcast on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. We hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.